the agenda. We're going to talk about how to come up with ideas. What if I have too many ideas? How to come up with characters, story, character arcs, world building, organizing your schedule for November. And if you guys are not, so I should say, in the past, I have been a NaNoWriMo liaison. That's National Novel Writing Month. This year I didn't sign up because they were going to make us all take training, which feels very corporate to me. And as a volunteer, I didn't have time for that. So I apologize. I don't think Albuquerque has a liaison this year, and I feel bad, but I just didn't have time to do all the things NaNoWriMo wanted me to do. But I will also give everyone a link if you want to join any online virtual write-ins, or I'll be doing some in-person events in Albuquerque. I will have a link to, and I'll send you guys an email with all this too, to my Facebook group, which is where I will put my schedule. And then Alex and Tamsin, like, they're welcome to schedule write-ins too. So yeah, keep us writing in November. Okay, cool. All right, so let's talk about, first let's do introductions real quick. I know Tamsin's not here. She'll show up a smidge late. I know she does that. She drops in, but that's how she makes a fabulous entrance. But we'll do a quick introduction here. So I am Sonia Doing. I am, let's see, I've written 7 nano novels. So I've been doing it for more than 7 years. And the first couple of novels I wrote, I did not publish, but I published 3 of my nano novels, and I'm about to publish my 4th. And when I say nano, that's basically writing a book in November, and best-selling author. And I also run an event, a company called Women's Thriller Writers Association, where I help women write, publish, and sell the page-turning thrillers they've always wanted to create. So that's my whole thing. And Alex, how about you introduce yourself?
All right, so I am Alex. My Nano username is Lex Black. I am a former municipal liaison for Nano. Also dropped out for the same reasons as Sonia. All the new requirements, just not enough time to do all of that stuff. So apologies in advance, but I will try to host some events. And so I have completed 2 nano novels, and then I have a couple of other ones that I didn't quite finish. And then one of the nano novels that I did finish, I did publish, and that was actually my first nano novel. And I write a lot of like psychological thrillers, and especially blended with sci-fi and technology elements. And I also do a little bit of like horror and fantasy, like the more speculative fiction side of things. And that's my spiel. I see that Townsend just joined.
Yay, perfect timing, Tamsin. Tamsin, tell us about yourself. Tamsin, you're muted, just in case you want to know.
She might still be getting ready.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, there we go.
But obviously that wouldn't probably be a good call. I'm having some trouble with my computer. My new Mac will not connect to Zoom.
Oh.
And so when I'm trying to get that to work, it's just, and I thought maybe I'd get it to friggin' go. No. So, all right, give me 1 second.
Okay.
So, hence why I was late getting here. Anyway, so hi.
Here you are. Hi.
Funky color because it's the way my light is, but anyway. Hi everybody. What are we doing? What am I saying?
We are
so
yes, we're introducing the organizers for today, which are you and Alex and myself, and we've introduced ourselves. So now you're up.
It's me. All right. Hi everybody. I'm Tamsin Silver, and I'm actually an author with Falstaff Books. And I've been published since 2011. I branched out from that publisher and changed over in 2012 and done self-publishing as well as small press and medium press. I am And that's my by night job. By day, I work for Presbyterian Hospital. I'm a strategic program manager, and I work with the vice president of growth for press. And that's the other side of my world. But I have been involved in NaNoWriMo itself, which this isn't, but anyway, moving on. I have been involved with it for over 10 years. And so doing writing during November is something I've done a lot. I originally started doing that in New York City, where I lived before I lived here in Albuquerque. So I think that sums me up.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And I want to welcome everyone and say hello to Brandy and Pat, some faces I recognize. Now, I want to ask some questions to all of you before we get started. Number one, and feel free to put this in the chat, or you can unmute yourself. There's not a huge group here. Do you have an idea for what you're writing in November? Yes or no? And you put that in the chat. You're free to unmute real quick and say something. All right. Somebody has a no. That's Cindy. Okay. So far we have 2 no's and a couple of yeses somewhat. All right.
Many yeses.
Yep. All right. So in that case, we are going to spend a little bit of time on what to do if you don't have an idea. So we'll do a little round robin here. I will start and then I'll give it to Alex and then Tamsin. So if you don't have ideas, I'd say keep an open mind with what you're watching on TV, the last book you read. Were there characters in that TV show or that movie or that book that you felt should have gone a different way? Or maybe you want to take that side character that you really loved and create a new book from that. I mean, that's kind of the quickest way to find an idea, is use a character that you already know and familiar with. I knew someone who used to write fan fiction about the thief from Xena Warrior Princess, right? But you could change, so it's not fan fiction. You might change the name so no one knows who it is exactly. But my suggestion is use characters you already know if you don't have any ideas. And then my other suggestion would be curious and listen. So here's my inspiration for November. I was watching a Doctor Who episode of all things, and Doctor Who said, liars and thieves don't work for love. And I was like, what the hell? What if they did? And so that's a whole inspiration for my novel in November. And just for that one tiny sentence, I have a whole novel planned out already. So be curious. All right, Alex, you're up.
All righty. So yeah, like Sonia said, draw inspiration from the world around you. There's just so much happening everywhere that you can draw ideas from. And so one of the things that I like to do for coming up with story ideas is to focus on the elements of story. So you have your plot, setting, character, mood, and theme. And so generally, whenever you get an idea, it's probably going to fall into one of those 5 elements of story, right? So you could come up with an idea for a plot first. And so that would be like the action that happens within the story. So say a lot of like movies draw off of this. So you could come up with just like a premise of, okay, you have like some characters who want to like rob a bank or something, right? You know, or something exciting. And so that could be the inspiration you draw on. And then setting, you could come up with a world idea first. So this works really well for like sci-fi and fantasy. So like the sci-fi genre, a lot of what it focuses on is on possibilities. So like possibilities of what if there was like this new technology or this new scientific discovery. And then fantasy is less about possibilities and more about emergence, like emerging yourself within a story world. It's about escape, right? And so that's kind of one of the ways you can use settings. So that works really well for like fantasy and sci-fi and the more speculative fiction realm. And then character. So like Sonia was saying, coming up with characters from like, say like a story that you're already familiar with, but just changing things up a bit and don't let people know that that's where you got your inspiration from. Or you could even draw inspiration from somebody you know, like say, you know, somebody who has like a really exciting life. You could draw some inspiration from there, but just change things up again. And so on mood, that might be a little bit more difficult. So what you're doing is say, oh, I want to draw inspiration from, say, like this feeling that I had whenever, I don't know, like you could talk about like a memory that you had in the past, say something like really scary happened to you. And so you could draw from those feelings and use that to build out your story. And then theme, that one you have to be a little bit careful with because it can come off as kind of preachy. So that one I wouldn't recommend too much, especially if you're just like starting out with writing, but it is possible to do. You just have to be very careful with it. And so those are my recommendations.
Awesome. Tamsin, you're up.
I don't know how much I topped that, buddy. That was awesome. Fantastic.
Thanks.
I love how Alex breaks down things. Like I always think to myself, why doesn't he teach classes about writing? Because he always has such really great insight in regard to understanding genre. And that's not me. What I'm going to tell you is something very different, which I guess that's why Sonia's like, we'll have these different people lead groups. For me, I write a lot of historical fantasy. I also write regular fantasy as we'll take a break. But one of the things that I always tell people if they're really struggling, obviously, is watch shows that make you feel inspired, right? Which we've already mentioned. The other thing is I tell people to do is look at historical events that are fascinating to you. Because the beauty with historical events, especially the older they are, is they are missing details. And the beauty of missing details, and I'll give an example. I was working on the Billy the Kid series, and they're talking about how all of these particular people were all gathered at the house for this particular thing, but no one knows what happened or was said. I was like, oh, it was so sad. Don't know what happened there. So you get to make those decisions. You get to have fun with it. You get to say, well, what if I decided, oh, hey, thank you. There it is. Book 3 came out about a month ago, and I've just been super stoked to have the whole series finally done. But I think that I get a lot of, and you might be like, well, where do I find that? What time period, first off, what time period fascinates you? When you see the perfect world that you want to write in, is it Victorian England? Is it in the Wild West? Is it in Asia? Like, where do you want it to be? See, here's the thing. Do not write what you think others want. Do not write what you think is hot right now, because I'm going to promise you right now, if it's hot right now, it's not going to be hot by the time you're done and you're selling it. Do not make decisions based on market, which some people might. If you're turning and burning a book in 6 months, sure, you can write to market. I don't know about you, but it takes me a year because I have another job and have a life. And so it takes me a year sometimes to write a book, if not longer. And so I always say to people, write what you love. If you wish there were more women of color in books in the West, they were there, they just didn't get written about. Write it. If you wish there were more LGBTQ characters, like in real life, you wish you could see those more in certain genres, write it. Whatever your passion is, because if you're passionate about it, then people are also going to be passionate about reading it, because that's going to come through in what you write, right? So what I always tell people is, where would you love to see a story take place? Where do you see in your head that you just love? All right, great. Now, did anything historical happen there that you might like to take a trip and twist it or take it and get your basic idea off of it? Some of the best stories that are fiction come from fact. And it doesn't matter if you use real history or if you just get your idea from it. But I always say it's a fantastic way to get your idea. You're like, I really love Victorian England. All right, let's look it up. What big things happened? Oh, and you find something interesting and all of a sudden you're on your way. So I recommend using history to give you ideas. You do not, repeat, you do not have to be insane like some people and keep that history exact. You can totally mess with it. That is the beauty of fiction. Historical fiction does not have any rules in that regard. So find what you want to write, what area you would like to see, what does it look like in your head? And if it's a world you're creating on your own, then you have literally no bounds. And you can just go which way you want, and you can pull from history or you can pull from your mind, and it doesn't matter. So when people are having trouble, I recommend reading books that inspire you, or authors whose words you like. Like, for instance, I don't write romance, but I love to read Nora Roberts and J.D. Robb because she's a very talented wordsmith. And when I read her stuff, I improve as a writer. So read stuff that inspires you. Read authors whose writing makes you see the work, and think about where you'd like to go. What kind of story you've always wanted to read, but no one's written. That's your focus. Find something you're really passionate about. And if you don't love it, here's the key. We're doing word count. If you get partway through this and you're like, I don't like this, start something new, it's fine. You are not forced to finish that one thing. This is about word count. This is about you being creative and having fun. So I'm hoping I covered enough and that gave you guys some ideas.
Yes, that's awesome. Well, and I have just a couple things to add. So
Yes.
number one, so my first book, and I should think about, I thought about the plot before I thought about the characters. So it was inspired, I was watching a documentary about the Amazon and how there was no ship, there's no way to travel the Amazon easily because there's a lot of sandbars. And so in my brain, I was like, well, what if there was a ship? What would it look like and how would it work? And then I came up with the characters. So that was the impetus for this one. And Brandy, you were saying you need more bones for your story. My suggestion is subplots. So for example, I've got like 10 characters in here, and every single character has their own goal, and none of those goals mesh, right? And that creates subplots. So for example, my main character, she just wants to have a great time and have a good vacation, which she doesn't get her wish.
I was about to say, I bet that doesn't happen.
No, there's an Inca god who wants to find someone to give his powers to. So he's totally messing up everything. There's the guy who owns the ship. The name of the ship is Toy of the Gods. The guy who owns the ship, he wants a successful launch because this is his business. Right? So there's all these different goals for every character, and they don't necessarily match each other, right? So they're kind of, it creates tension and it creates subplots and it creates a little more meat to the bones.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I have a background in Shakespeare and I love many characters.
All right. Any questions about coming up with ideas for stories? Oh, okay. All right. So we're going to go on to who here has too many ideas, like are not sure how to narrow down. All right. There's a hand. Oh, Tamsin. All right.
No, I was being silly because there's so many books I would like to write that I have on my docket, but I'm on contract and I received edits 2 months ago that I haven't had a chance to start. So that's where I have to.
Well, and I'm currently trying to finish book 4 of my series, which completes the series, so I can move on to this book in November. Yeah, I know, right? I'm so excited. Yeah, so I want to hurry up and get it done. But let me talk real quickly about, too many ideas. Okay, we do have someone. Megan has too many. All right, so, which is a problem for a lot of people. So my suggestion is to kind of go through all of your ideas, see if one is calling to you more than the others, because I have a sci-fi I want to write, but I really want to work on this other story. So I know this one's calling me. I'm going to work on it. Another idea or another possibility is to just write a paragraph for each of those ideas and see if you can keep going. If you can only write a paragraph and you don't have a whole story, it's not going to be right to be able to write it 50,000 words in November. You need to find something that's going to keep your interest and that you're going to be able to continue writing on. And Jim, do you have a question or do you have some input on too many ideas?
A question, if I could.
Absolutely.
It's not 100%, but let me know if this is better for later. So I haven't seen the show Succession at all, but I've been percolating, and actually it's a screenplay. I'm a poet, but this is something separate for a few years, and it's not on the nose of what they did in Succession, which I really haven't seen. I heard it's very good, but it's a theme of let's say like a older generation and then the children. If you had some suggestions, again, I should watch a little Succession because I hear it's good. How to not get bogged down by that's a competitive intergenerational story. I'm not phrasing the question great, but I again been percolating this idea for some years, and just how I should not feel intimidated that there's been a good show. Again, might be like that might be a screenplay or whatnot, but not to get like intimidated by something's been done very well, which is related but not what I'm doing exactly at all.
Okay, that's an excellent question. Let me finish with too many
Sure.
story ideas. No, that is a great question. Let me see if Alex and Tamsin have anything to say about too many ideas, and then I will get to your question.
Thank you so much.
No problem. Alex, do you have anything to say about too many ideas?
Yeah, so one thing you can do if you have too many ideas is you can write down each idea on an index card and then take all those index cards and lay them out and then just like look at them. That way you have a visual of all of the different story ideas next to each other. And then you can see if a specific one is calling to you, as Sonia said. But that's just kind of a way to visualize it a little bit, which could be helpful.
Tamsin, do you have anything on that?
When I have multiple stories that I am deciding between writing, I start writing whichever one I think I should be writing. And if I find that the work is harder than I'd like it to be, and I'm really pushing and and it's just not, the story's just not coming. I set it aside and I go, okay, well, who am I hearing? What am I hearing? Because yes, authors hear people. And so, for instance, I thought I was writing the next Mark the Necromancer book, and I started writing it, and that book the first book had been written and I hadn't had any problems. I could not for the life of me get past, like I was just it felt like more than work. And so I was like, okay, I'm not hearing I'm trying to hear her through something else. So I sat down and thought maybe I'll write the next Sky novel, and that just flowed. And I was like, oh, that's where we're supposed to be. So sometimes when I have extra, I sit down and I just start writing it a little bit ahead of time. I did it before November before, like I took a couple, like last week or so of October, and I was like, all right, each time I'm going to write a little bit about what, and whichever one seemed that I heard the best is how I chose which one I ended up doing. Which is a little strange, probably.
Cool. No, that makes sense to me. All right, Jim, I'm going to get, so your question is why, if you're going to write something, if you're intimidated because someone else has done something similar, how do you get through it, right?
Yeah, if I could just clarify one more part, just of
Sure.
I'm not sure if intimidate is the best word, but like I know this show has been so brilliantly done. So it's a couple of things. One, uh, mine is related a little bit on this notion. I almost think of the idea of primogeniture with mine, except it's a fancy word. But just the fact that something somewhat related has been done. Secondly, I'm naturally a poet, read a lot of poetry, and where I'm very imaginative, creative. I guess one challenge with is to
Uh-oh.
I don't know if you got cut off, Jim, but,
sorry, can you hear me again?
oh,
Can you hear
yep,
me?
I can hear you now.
Oh, sorry, I just put my thing. Sorry. The other part of the question is, so I'm super imaginative and have my unique voice with my poetry. With this screenplay, a challenge for me is I could see this. I'm trying to have a certain tone, and I'm sort of fighting a little bit with the tone because I could see it being a little more comedic, which I don't want the focus to be. So also thinking about how to have like a sort of serious competitive tone, and then secondly, not to feel like because there's some kind of similarity in some way with Succession that would bog me down, if you see what I'm saying. Thank you.
Yeah, all right. So my first answer is, I understand what you're saying. Like I've felt that way about some of the things I've created, but then what I realize is there are so many people in this world who may never have heard of Secession, like me. I've never heard of this show. So if I was going to read your screenplay, I probably would not compare it to that show since I don't know about it. Now, because it's a screenplay, right? And you're obviously trying to get maybe a series or a movie. See, that's a little different for me than say if it was a novel. If you were writing a novel, I would be like, don't worry about it. Just write it. Who cares about the show? Because if you have a novel and there's a show, you know, it's gonna be a little different. But also,
for imagination, we could say it's a novel. Let's say for imagination, if you have some things you could add if it were a novel, let's say.
yeah. Well, and because there are so many people out there, not everyone is going to compare it. Your story is probably going to be different than that series. Just because, and like when I earlier, when I shared you guys my inspiration for November, I'm not worried about sharing that inspiration because you guys could use that inspiration because we're all going to write something a little different. You know, I'm a very different writer than other people. So I'd say if this is the story that is calling you to write it, it's probably the story you need to write. And whether they did this well or not, that's fine, but you are you and you're going to make it great in your own way. And what was the other thing?
Oh, sorry. The other part is just I'm just trying to figure out what tone with my poetry. I have a very
tone.
Special voice and whatnot. I guess with like I just saw recently like kind of a popular movie, and it was so cliche written. I really was disappointed in that. I guess that's kind of like we see a lot of these movies, but I'm just trying to figure out with my tone of feeling that like part of me in is like tempted by like adding a little bit, maybe a little too much in the humor side where I don't want it to be so humorous. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I'm just trying to figure out how, but like when I'm doing poetry, my voice really comes through. And this story is very interesting to me, but like I feel like I'm a little bit not feeling. I have to figure out how I deal with the tone.
Okay. Well, here's my suggestion. So in this case, I would say just write it. Write it the way that feels right to you. Finish it. And then when it's done, so what I do with my novels is I give it to a review group. And I think sometimes we have to get that book or that story outside ourselves, give it to someone else so they can read it and see and give you feedback and say if it's humorous or not, or how they feel about the story. And then that way, if it's too humorous, you could take it back and be like, okay, I need to change this. But I feel in this case, you just got to get the story out first. Okay, Alex and Tamsin, you guys have anything else to add to those?
Yeah. So to answer the first question about similar works to yours, remember that anything you write is always going to have your unique touch as an author. It's always going to have your individuality. And another thing to keep in mind about TV shows is that they're often written by multiple authors. Like they have multiple authors who they each write a couple episodes. And so they're generally going to be less cohesive than a story that would have been written by a single author. So I do think you have an advantage there. And so then to answer your second question about the tone, so you stated that your voice really comes through on your poetry. So what you could do is write out a couple of poems that have the tone that you're looking for, and then just kind of keep them in mind. Like you could have them, like you can print them out and set them aside, and anytime you need inspiration for the tone of your screenplay, you can grab one of those poems and just read through it. That way it gets your thought process within that same mood. And then also I would say to just, like Sonia said, just write the screenplay, and even if it comes out humorous or more humorous than you wanted it to, remember that you can always go back and edit. You can take things out that you don't want to be in there. You can add things in. That's one of the great things about writing, is it's not done until it goes to print or gets made into the movie. There's always going to be that revision process, right? And then another thing on screenplays is a lot of times whenever screenplays are being written, the writers will write out like the actions and the scenes first and kind of like hold off on the dialogue and add the dialogue later after they're done with writing out all the action, because movies are action based, right? So like different art forms, or like different story art forms, they kind of have different strengths, right? So movies are very visual, so they're very action based. They focus a lot on plot. Novels are very like introspective. There's a lot of narration, and they really excel at getting within characters' heads. And then like, whatchamacallit, the like plays, those are very dialogue heavy because most of the action happens through dialogue. And so since you're writing a screenplay, you really want to focus on the action side of things. So if you write that first, that's probably going to make it easier for you to really focus on that tone from your poems. That way you don't really have like the dialogue distracting you. So hopefully that helped.
Thank you, guys. Those two, both of you guys, very helpful. Thanks.
I am going to completely negate Alex. So I have written for screen, and for me, it was easier to do that dialogue first. So, but of course I was doing a web series. And so it was very character driven, and it was dialogue heavy. But there was also a lot of movement and action. There were episodes that were less talking, more fighting. There were some that were all talking. One of the most powerful episodes is a huge verbal, tense scene that all got shot in one apartment, and it's dialogue. So it really depends on what you hear or see first. There's no reason you have to write the action first for film. I would recommend, so maybe when you say action, Alex, also you might mean let's back up. The difference between plays and film is that as the person writing the film, you are telling the audience what you want them to see. In a play, I get as an audience member, I get to be like, oh, I can watch this character or I can watch that character. I personally love to watch the characters who aren't talking. I love to watch internal dialogue. But as someone who's writing film, you want to direct the eye of the reader. And some of that comes from writing, what kind of shot it is, where we're coming in from, what we see, and giving that main idea, telling about your characters. You're not giving a lot. I mean, this is film. And doing that dialogue and starting to hear those people and going back and putting in that. You can also type in fight scene here, come back and do it, but if you definitely have visuals you like, whereas you want that camera to pan in a certain way, if you see them coming in from top down and going across the ground, you might say that in it, right? So you don't have to do action first. You don't have to do dialogue first. It's whatever you're more driven by, whatever you feel like is more of your story that you want to do. And I'm going to tell you right now, there's nothing wrong with humor. You can have a very serious book, but if there's no humor, then it's not real life anyway. And so if you are worried about, oh no, there's humor. Well, if there's no humor, your readers are going to, it's not going to be as enjoyable for readers. I'm going to tell you, even it doesn't have to have a lot, but look back at some of your more like even heavy dramatic stuff. There's always some humor in there. Always. Look at Marvel. There's always something. It might not be a lot, but there's some. So you don't shy away from the comedy. If you find you write some great comedy, lean into it, see where it goes. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Awesome questions, Jim. And now we're going to move on to character development and how we figure out our characters for our stories. And like earlier, I said that when I wrote my first book, I wrote the plot first and then threw the characters into it. And what I found was they were terrible characters. Like they did not work at all. I had one character, they were awful. I had one character who did not want to talk about her past because she was embarrassed by it. So she would never talk. And I was like, what am I doing with a character who doesn't talk? So I had to go and I came up with all new characters for this story and rewrote the book all over again, and it worked way better. But a lot of times, like right now, I came up, so for my next book, I came up with the plot, but I immediately pictured my character for this book. Her name's Kate. She is a former thief who is in big trouble, right? This is the idea where thieves and liars don't work for love. Well, they might work for her. So she's in big trouble. And so I know the character, I know her name, and I know a little bit about her. But what I'm going to do before November is I'm going to fill out a character sheet for her. And what I mean is I have a whole spreadsheet that I fill out about my character. And if you guys are interested, I'm going to put the link in the thing. It goes to my website. If you guys don't want to be subscribed, you can always, as soon as you get the character list, you can unsubscribe or whatever. But that link goes to the sign up. And basically I have a whole character, how to write characters in 30 minutes or less. And to me, I have to know my character, Kate. I have to know what she likes, what she doesn't like, what her opinions are, so that when I throw her into a dangerous scene where she might be about to get killed and she's got to figure out a way how to save herself, I know how she's going to react. I'm going to go through and there are 10 former thieves, or not former thieves, former lovers who are thieves who are going to show up in this story. So I have to write their background and figure out who they are. There's going to be one military man who's going to be in this story. There's of course the villain who for some reason I don't know if any of you watch Project Runway. I can't think of his name. Posen, I think is his last name. He was one of the judges on Project Runway, but he has these looks that he's like, I think he's going to be the impetus for my evil character. Zach Posen. Yes, yes, yes. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to write these character lists, and I'm going to prepare so that way I'm really comfortable with who all my characters are. I might even, another thing to consider is to write a little backstory about your character. Something you're not necessarily going to put in your novel, but you could use that in November as your 50,000 words. Writing a backstory sometimes helps you get to know who they are a little bit better. Because I know when I first sent my first book through my reviewers, they all told me they didn't care about my main character because they didn't understand her. She didn't seem very nice. Like, she didn't have any personality. So I had to go back and really get to know her and then rewrite the novel again. So that's all I have to say about character, because I could just keep going on and on, but I'll let these two give their suggestions.
All right. So whenever you're writing and developing characters, you want to really focus on character depth. And so one of the ways that you can add depth to characters is by defining their values. And one of the great things you can do with defining their values is give them juxtaposing values. So you could have like a character who they claim that they really like value love, and they think they value love, but they're actually like a really like hateful and spiteful kind of person. And so you have like that built-in tension right there, right? And so that increases depth. And the more of those that you have, the more depth you're going to be able to apply to your characters. And so whenever you're creating characters, you want to make sure that your main character has the most depth, because that's who your story is about, right? And then the more that a character is like a side character, the less important they are, the less depth you want them to have. Because if you're really random side character who's only in there for like 5 chapters, if they have more depth than your main character, that's going to be a problem, because they're going to overshadow the main character, and then your readers gonna care more about this side character than they do about your main character. So you kind of have to make sure that a lot of the depth focuses on your main character as opposed to the side characters. But that doesn't mean that you can't have any depth in the side characters. You just have to make sure that your main character has more depth.
I could tell you to make sure you know every character that you plan to write, and that you create these sheets, and that I do all these things that they're talking about. I could tell you that I do all of those things. Sonia is starting to laugh. I don't do any of that. So I learn my characters as I go. That doesn't make the other way wrong. It doesn't mean that I'm not organized, though. Sometimes I'm not. But a lot of times for me to get to know a character, I need to talk to them. I need to write them. I need to be them to know what they are. And for me to create a character sheet is not, I won't go by that. I'm going to go by what I hear and what I feel when I write them, when I am them. And when they come to hard decisions and fights and battles, I'll write the battle, and then I'll go back and look at it and be like, all right, knowing what you know of this character at this time, does this fit? Would they have known to even do that? Have you actually justified those choices previous to this fight? For me, it's about getting to know them organically, and I like to write them and learn them. What's interesting to me is that when I start to write them and I get to know them, I know them. Like, I don't need to be like, oh, they love this color, or this was their childhood trauma, or this, all good things to know. Like, if you're new to writing and character sheets are something you love, then you are way better and more organized than me. And I think that you are wonderful. I have so many of my friends who are New York Times bestsellers or who are like bestsellers in their range. And they do all of that. And for Billy the Kid stuff, what I did because there's so many people in history in that story, and none of them have the same name. Is that I had a list I did have a character list of all the people. But here is something I will recommend if you do what I do. It's called a book Bible. And if you're not going to build ahead of time, build while you go, or build when you edit. So building while you go is kind of hard because you are in the thick of writing and you want to, you don't want to stop. So build when you edit, either way. But as you write and you create a magic spell that so-and-so knows how to do, jot it down. Just have an extra sheet of paper next to you on your computer and just go, character name, this spell, this is what it means. It also will save you time later, because I've never had to look up a spell and how it was spelled or what it was made of. And it really should have had a Bible, and it would have saved me a lot of time. So if you're going to create as you go, just jot things down. All right, I've created this character. I mentioned his beautiful blue eyes. Jot it down. Keep going. So I do that. And then I also, if it's historical and they're historical, I have a list of all of them. I have their pictures from history. I have the short description of what they look like and anything we know about them personality-wise from history, and then we move on. So it's not a full sheet. It's a list. It's a Word document that I cut and paste pictures into if they have them from history, and then anything I know from books I've read. But I don't do full sheets on them. But if I have too many characters for me to keep track of, I do lists, and I always do a book Bible as I write. Specifically, if you're writing fantasy or you're creating a brand new world, highly helpful in that regard.
Oh yeah, I totally agree. Because when I wrote Toy of the Gods, I didn't realize it was going to be series until I wrote the end.
Oh, like,
oh crap, the Inca god gave his powers to this side character. I've got to write her story. So yeah, so I didn't really write a Bible necessarily. I did but I had to figure out, okay, what were the powers that this character now has, and keep a list of those. My editor does a good job of catching things, because she's read all the books, and she'd be like, wait a minute now, this isn't right. I'm like, oh, okay. And my beta readers sometimes catch stuff too. So having a Bible is awesome, especially if you're going to write that series instead of just a single book.
Remembering which book I wrote it in was always a good time too. As I was writing book 3, I was like, that happened to this character. Which historical thing happened? When was that? When did I throw that in there? And then I'd be like, okay, that's book 1.
Right.
I searched all through book 2 once to realize it was in book 1.
Well, and Tamsin, Pat has the perfect quote for you, because you were saying you love Nora Roberts. Pat says that Nora Roberts says that she meets her characters when they show up on the page.
That is what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
that's when I mean. I meet my main character before that. One of them I dreamt about. I was reading a series that had a werewolf in it that I really loved, and I then watched a bunch of Underworld movies back to back and went to sleep. That equated to a whole dream sequence. But I had this dream, and I got in the shower, was getting ready for work, and I felt this character going, hey. And I'm like, fine, if you're so big and important, what's your name? And I heard the word Denica, and I'm like, okay. And I wrote that book And here's something else to know about that. So I started writing that book, but I kept feeling like I was missing half the story. And all of a sudden I realized that's because I was writing it from her point of view and I needed to be from two different people's points of view. And I started writing Cash's point of view, and everything in the book, I wrote 175,000 word book in 3 months.
Damn.
Yeah. Does it need editing? Oh yeah. That's the one that I have back. But it is, but that's the sometime the character was, loud, and a lot of times I know my main character. I just don't know my side characters until they show up on the page. Until they show up on the page and they're there, and I write them. And I do have a bad tendency to write characters I enjoy. I had someone once say, "I like all your characters, good guys and bad guys." I'm like, sorry, I don't. But that was the point of the Windfire series, was that you were supposed to find you were not good or bad, but you found that you were in the center, and that was intentional.
Right. Well, let's talk about that, because, right, we don't want to write. I think I initially learned about bad characters or evil characters from Doctor Who, and they're all like, they're all completely evil. There's nothing good about them. But I don't like to write characters completely bad, right? We want them to have a little balance. We want to like them. We want to, is anybody watching The Rings of Power? Yeah, a few of you are watching it. Like the last episode, I will not tell you, I will not do a thing here, but last episode was like, no. All right, but but I want to write characters. Well, and even my third novel, Cast-Offs of the Gods, my readers are like, we love Alex, but Alex is the bad guy. Sorry, Alex. Alex is the bad guy. Like, how's that happening? Right. So if you are writing characters, your good characters are not all good. They have a flaw. You have to bring in that flaw. Your bad characters, we want to see your readers want to see a depth to your characters, that there is something good about them, but they're really evil. Anything else about any of? Oh, I do want to mention characters that are just going to show up for a few minutes. I don't give them names, right? To me, because they are, and just like Alex was mentioning, the depth of your character really also depends on how important they are to the book. If they're only going to be there a few minutes, I don't give them names. I'm sure there was something else I was going to say, but I forgot.
You said something that actually made me remember one of the things I want to talk about. Flaws. People are flawed. Characters are flawed. I love flaws. I think that if characters don't have any, they're not interesting and no one wants to read them. And so, and I'm also that person that likes the happy ending at the end of my series. Okay. If you read my book, I'm not going to kill the main character at the end. I am not going to kill, like, that is not how I roll. You're safe with my books. But I do torture them until they get there. They earn it. So that's something for me. But that between that and having them be flawed, it's going to give you more meat for your writing. Because if they aren't flawed, if they don't have things that they're not good at or things that they're fighting with, be it internal or external, you don't have any plot. You don't have any meat to your bones. So go ahead and give them flaws. Like, let them be flawed people, because real people are flawed. And the more real your characters are, the more invested your readers are.
All right, I'm going to give you guys one more thing on character, which is, to me, all right, so if you want your characters likable, one of the ways to do that is to help your reader connect with them. And it's one of the things I talk about in the spreadsheet too, which is just like when we're building a platform as authors, we want to talk to people about what makes us similar to them and what makes us different. So I want you to think about your characters in that way too. Like, what about your character is similar to what who your readers are? Like, so me main character, Leslie, she owns 2 basset hounds and she loves those dogs and she makes sure they're well taken care of. She also drinks way too much coffee, but she also loves to eat. But she's an adventurer who goes off on crazy adventures, right? That makes her very different from many of my readers, but it also makes them enjoy what she's doing. But finding ways to connect your characters to your readers is a great way to help them like your characters more.
Yeah, and I wanted to mention a couple things about character flaws. So whenever you're writing characters, especially like your main character, you do want to kind of have that balance where they're not just flaws. They need to have some redeeming qualities too. And it's a good idea to establish some of that at least early on in the story. That way your reader doesn't like end up hating the main character and just keeping that with them throughout the whole story. And then another thing on character flaws is that is generally what drives the internal conflict. And so a lot of times in stories, the main character has to overcome their character flaw and solve that internal conflict before they can actually solve the external conflict. And so by overcoming their flaw, that's what gives them the insight and the ability to overcome the external conflict.
Cool. All right. Thank you, Alex. All right. I figure we'll move on to world building unless anyone has any more questions about character development. All right. So world building, which when we're talking about world building, you know, it doesn't just have to be fantasy, but really a lot of it is fantasy, sci-fi. You know, when you're writing a story that's not based completely in a real world. And so world building, I think one of the things that helped me with world building was reading books that are really good at this. Julie Zernita is amazing at this, at building a world that you are immediately drawn into. And I think one of the things to think about is to not throw everything all at once at us. You know, you have this image of this fantasy or sci-fi world in your head, but we as the reader don't want it just squished at us, right? We want to hear about it bit by bit. We want to see pieces of it in your story. And what I'm trying to get at is try not to what we call word vomit your story out or your world out. But what you might do is if you are world building for the first time or you're not sure where to go with the story first, is maybe that first chapter that's going to be a throwaway is that first chapter you're writing is just all about your world, how things work. What kind of technology do you have? Is it magic? How does the magic work? What is the magic rules? I think that's pretty much, yeah. So and then once you've kind of spit all that out, then start writing the story. So basically what I mean is you're going to start with your character in a scene in your world, and you're going to see them interact with how that world is different than the world we're in now. Yeah, on to you, Alex.
All right, so world building and setting kind of go hand in hand. They're a little bit pretty much like the same thing. And so something about like your setting and your story's world is it's not just about the physical place, but it can also be about the things within that place, like the different technologies or magic systems, or like the governments of like your story world, or the different like cultures and societal rules. So those are some of the things that you can really draw on to build out your world to make it more real for the readers, right? And then some other things on setting is, like Sonia said, a lot of times it does draw more towards like the fantasy side of things and the sci-fi side of things. And so, as I mentioned earlier, that sci-fi is typically about possibilities and fantasy is more about like escape. But even like a story that takes place in the real world, that has setting too. And that has a world that you're applying your own artistic touch to it. So it's not like a true one-to-one mirror of the real world, because it's always going to have elements of story within it, right? And so whenever you're writing out setting, some of the things that you can do to kind of avoid like the word vomit is take a piece of the setting that you want to describe, like say you're wanting to describe like a house, right? And then take another element of story, say it could be character or plot or mood, and kind of combine them. So like in that example of you wanting to describe a house, you could say, okay, maybe I want to use this to build character. And so you can say, okay, it's maybe the main character's childhood home. And so while you're describing the house, it could be through the context of that character's memories. Like maybe they had like really happy childhood memories of the place, and so they're remembering it fondly. Or maybe they had like traumatic memories, and so it brings up these really powerful emotions. And so you could basically color the setting based off of the character's emotions, right? And so that's a good way to make your settings a lot more powerful. And then another tip that I wanted to mention that I actually heard from another writer, what he does is whenever he's writing about places in the real world is he'll go on YouTube and look up videos of people just recording those places. Like that way he can really get like the setting in his head. He gets like the sounds that are taking place, gets the imagery, and he uses that as inspiration to write. And I think that's really cool. Like that's pretty helpful.
Great. I use Google Earth. I use Google Earth a lot. I wrote a short story. Faith Hunter did a anthology in her Rogue Mage world. And we were able to, everybody got a copy of because that whole series also has a gaming thing, has a LARP. And so we were all sent the main book with all the rules. And I discovered a section I thought was cool, but it was going to be in Malaysia area. And I was like, I know nothing about that area over there. So I needed to learn more about that whole coastline and around India and over Malaysia. And I had to just really you don't know the address to put in. You just kind of scroll on in and start looking around and find what works for you. And I find that helped me a lot when I've been describing things and choosing locations. Because again, even when I write my fantasy, I kind of like it to be historically accurate. I try to play with, if space looks a certain way, I'll use it. It'll help me with my fight scene. I discovered that there was an amphitheater on this island, and I choreographed an entire fight scene around that amphitheater and had a blast with that. Videos where you can hear the sounds and stuff, fantastic. Also, I had a very large problem when I first started writing of info dumping, because I felt all that information was very valuable. It was going to be important in the rest of the book. And I'd even whittled it down to the stuff that wasn't important. But what I was doing was I was putting it all together, and I was just clumping it in one thing. And here is how, and I had such a hard time trying to figure out how to fix that problem. And it was just so baffling for me until all of a sudden I had to think about the reader. If you think about the reader and the stuff you want them to know and when you want them to know it, and that's the key, when you want them to know it, when do they need that information? So I can talk about how this building is and the entire political structure, but if they're not going to come into contact with that kind of situation with the political until halfway through the book, they're not going to remember that paragraph that you put in book 1 and that first part of the chapter. They're not. So if I need them to remember, I started thinking about, so what relates to what we're doing now? We've entered the city, so we need to see the basic part of it. We don't need to know what 10 blocks away has going on. They do in about 4 chapters, and we'll describe it then. And so I started going, well, when do I need that? And so I started storing that. Like if I'd written too much, I started putting it in a file and saying, I don't want to lose this. It's well written, but I don't need it yet. And so that's how I learned to break up my info dumps and my word vomit per se, is that I figured out what was really needed for the moment and what I would prefer they remembered closer to when it's actually going to be important. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Okay. And so that's how I really learned to break that up. I looked at it from the idea of what, what do we need to know? But I don't do that a lot of times until I'm editing. So yeah, write. Just get it down, get all your information out, enjoy the process, write all of that. And then when you go back, if you have more than a paragraph or like, and I'm talking full, like if you have more than like 2 small paragraphs or 1 large on setting, take a look at it, figure out how to break it up, figure out if you really need it all, look at it. Because you should never, nothing is more boring than a full page of a book on exposition and the political yada yada and what they built their buildings out of. And all right, so no, find a way to break it up. And most importantly, if you know it's important, you should know why it's important. If it's important because you want them to know that for this part of the book, then make sure you give that information closer to that point. And it's just a safer way to split it. Other thing about world building is what I think Alex and Sonia really hit most of everything I would have said. You really do. You just you want them to live in the space. You want them to visually see it. And so enjoy it. Sorry, loud bike outside. And just remember, when you world build, if you're building a full world, think of everything that is important in that world and how it affects the reader, how it affects your characters, and if it's necessary or not for them to know, because you might be something that doesn't even apply to them, but you know it, and that's okay too.
Cool. And one thing I did want to add, if you are writing anything historical, so I've written memoirs, I've written stories about my grandfather, right around World War II. Some things that I did was I watched a bunch of movies from that era and listened to music from that era and just got into the feel and the words that they used and used that to help me write the story. So if you're writing historical and there is access to things from that year, I'd say get into those and get into the feel of it. And Jim, what's your question?
Thank you. This is such an interesting topic, this world building. Just thinking out loud a little bit, just heard some good lectures on that. I really like Balzac, and they're talking about Pere Goriot, which is a brilliant novel he wrote. And it's this theme of someone coming from the provinces. And it's fantastic about how there are all these young people trying to come to provinces and compete and rise to the top. And it's fantastic with the different settings. Like one is like in contrast to the Greeks, where you had one-on-one battles like the roulette wheel, where there's multiple people competing. So that was a plus. On the negative, I saw like sort of an award-winning documentary, and this relates to another piece. So it was like about like science, but it was so boring. They just showed like the guy biking to work and eating like a vegetarian dish, blah, 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 to convey. In my piece, one of the characters, the main character, is a scientist, and he runs like an institute. So I'm just trying to figure out how, I think it's a kind of a unique angle on his workplace, but how this contrast between boring, ways, again, like this award-winning documentary where who cares, the bikes to work, blah, 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 blah. And then again, the Balzac world is so well done. If you have any tips for like kind of conveying workplace and kind of really capturing the zeitgeist, the meaning of it, if you see what I'm saying. I'm not sure if I explained that well.
So I'm guessing your story, we see people are in the office a lot.
So it's a competition between a father and a couple kids. The father is pioneered some science, and like he heads up like a big science institute. So I'm showing some of his, I guess, like kind of showing some of his work world, how to balance that, because it's very interesting and kind of relates. But when I saw this like a science documentary from a couple years ago, so boring, just showing like a scientist biking to work. And then in contrast, I think Balzac is brilliant about like kind of showing these scenes of all these people competing, young people trying to make it, you know what I mean? So he does a great job trying to think about how, like, because sometimes like world building, I find not successful when I see some movies or books. It's kind of like, you know what I mean? If you see my book.
All right, so my suggestion would be, is I think what brings what makes it more interesting when you've got an office environment is the interactions. So and you just mentioned, you know, in the one you have competition going on. That means people are going to be butting heads. There's tension there. There's subplots because people have different directions. And then sometimes some of us find like the details of science interesting, like what is this experiment and what does it look like? Or even think of the shows like The Office, right? We watch that because it's funny, but it's also human interaction. We're not just watching someone bike to work and sit down and eat their lunch kind of thing, right? So I think human interaction is going to help with making that more interesting.
Not to mention, if you've worked in an office and you watch that show, you know those people.
Yes, that's true.
And you know those situations. There's always that person that steals the stapler. There's always the person that like
Steals my lunch. The person who steals my lunch.
ghost pepper. Make your lunch and put in a ghost pepper. You will find out very quickly who is stealing your lunch. You can tell that I am not the kindest about that. But hey, I don't steal my food, man. I enjoy my food.
Oh yeah.
One of the things I thought of when you said the whole biking to work thing is the first thing my head said was, why are they biking to work? Do they do that because there are cars? There's not cars. Was there never any cars? Is it because they don't have money for a car? Is it because of the way the society is there? Is it because of the way the city is designed? Is it because right there's some world building for you? Biking to work, and the reason why says things about the world, right? You know, if they are, you know, you just have to make those decisions are part of your world building. Why is he biking to work?
Well, one last
Right?
tiny thing with that. So the father is the more dynamic character, and he's doing this really cool thing. What percentage of the time kind of gets that across? So it's more the story of the father competing with the children, but in the science setting, he's doing this really cool stuff. I was just wondering how one thinks about how much of that to show, you know, like, you know, that he's this kind of exciting figure doing interesting things. Like, if you see what I'm saying.
Competing with his children?
So I guess I mean like his work is fascinating. So I guess like trying to figure out like how much of the story, but the story is his competition with the children. So like how much, just like with the timing, like how much to devote to his fascinating profession, if you see what I'm saying.
I think, you know, number one, I think part of that's going to happen as you write the story. You're going to find when you need to add that in. But I also think not just showing us that he's doing something interesting, but have other characters that are either in that space or
Sure.
right, that are going to tell us that he's doing something interesting.
And if it doesn't relate and doesn't move your story, then you don't need it.
Yeah.
So if it's just, oh, he does go to, I want to show him at work and that he does cool stuff, and it doesn't actually move your plot, then it can't, then it shouldn't be there. It could be mentioned what he does when he's doing other things. But if those people that he interacts or the things happening in that setting do not relate to the other storyline, if they are two separate stories, there's a problem you're going to have there. You're going to need to find a reason to connect those.
Sure.
Well,
Sure, thanks.
and you could do other things like maybe he went to a research gosh, what am I thinking of? An event where he was awarded something for his research, or he was awarded a huge grant for his research, and that's a big deal in the academic world.
It is.
Right? So you could, and if you couldn't figure out how to bring in the his environment without making it boring, that's another option. And I got to put a Band-Aid on real quick. You guys keep going. You got this.
Yeah. So if the father character, if his research is going to somehow play a part in how he competes with the children, like say you're just trying to get across that he's really smart, and so the children are kind of like afraid of him because of his intelligence, all you need to do is just show that other characters within the story world are also afraid of the father because of his scientific prowess. So you really don't need a whole lot about it. You could pretty much condense it all down into like a scene or a couple of moments spaced throughout, just to kind of keep that thought within the reader's head.
But if he's creating a new Frankenstein, I might want to see his process.
Right. See, like I said, if it's part of the story
Mhm.
and it connects to the other stuff you're doing, then it's justifiable to show him going to work.
Yeah.
One of the TV shows that I really loved how they connected it was Supergirl. At least the first couple seasons. I didn't stick with it just because I was busy and couldn't keep track of all the TV shows. And but the fact that her coming into the office and how that her friends from the office were also involved in the stuff outside the office. So it all made sense for you to see her go to work and do all the things. So they all connected. But if they're completely separate and you're just doing it to show how cool his science is and how neat what he's working on, but if it doesn't actually play into the rest of it, you might want to consider. It's just the thought. Doesn't mean you have to cut it. Just think about how it can be part of the entire story. And now is he competing against his own children?
Yes. Adult children.
Ew.
And are they competing like scientifically, or like what kind of competition?
It's not scientifically, it's a different area. He's doing this, he's like a star in his area, and it's a very interesting area. So, but the theme is just like he's competing against his children and whatnot. So yeah, I'll just try to work it. I guess I was just thinking of like the setting in contrast to the bicycling could be really fascinating, that world. And I was just saying, like, again, this is kind of award-winning documentary. It was this whole thing of showing the guy biking to work, because it was so boring, in contrast. But thank you guys for your ideas.
Okay, cool. All right. Do we have any other questions on world building or anything around there? Oh, okay. So what we're going to move on to is when November starts, how do we keep writing throughout the month? And I have a couple of suggestions. Number one, sorry.
I was like, number one, I was like, I thought you were going to show us something cool up on like this. I was like, oh, yeah. And I was like, oh,
sorry. It's just my ceiling.
so excited.
So number one is, okay, I got to remember them all. So number one, do whatever research you think you need now. But when November starts, don't worry about doing research. If you come to a spot and you're not sure about the details, just write them as you think they would be, or put a little asterisk or a little symbol something that you know when you come back to it, that that is a section that you need to do your research. I can use my phone's ring. Let me just turn this off. There we go. So do your research ahead of time if you can, about location, about, you know, people's jobs, about procedure, you know, if it's a police procedural, try to do that research. But yeah, in November, you don't want to be doing the research. If you want to get 50,000 words, just keep writing. The other suggestion is to make yourself a, what do you call, like a bulletin board or an online an online place where you have the pictures. Yeah, you find pictures of people on the internet that look like your characters, put those on
Pinterest.
there. What's that?
Use Pinterest, create a
Pinterest.
board.
Yes, and I love your puppy. Hugs to
He was
Caden.
being all whiny below me, wanting attention. So I
Aww.
went to pick him up and he just laid down and gave me belly. I'm like, dude, I can't pick you up there. So
Aww.
he's been a little
Yeah, so create some kind of a board, either physical or online in Pinterest, that has pictures of your characters, pictures of your locations, whatever you can think of to help get you into the story as quickly as possible. And then my third suggestion is get involved in writing events. Now, those of you in Albuquerque, I apologize that there's no NaNoWriMo liaison. At least it didn't look like it. But if you want to join virtual, if anybody here wants to join a virtual event or wants to join me here in Albuquerque at, you know, I might be writing on the train, I might write at a coffee shop. I'm going to put my schedule on this Facebook group. Whoops, that's not the cup. I'm going to send you a link to the Facebook group. You are all welcome to join, and I will put up events in that group. And Alex, you're up next.
All right. Yeah. So writing with other authors is pretty much the best motivator because that's just how humans are in general. We're very social creatures. So being around other people gives us like that social accountability and helps us to actually get things done. Right. So I think that's probably the best way to keep writing. And then one thing I did want to mention is about outlining. Like that's kind of like that term that like strikes fear into like a lot of authors' hearts. Like, no, outlining, ah. And so one of the things about outlining is you don't have to do it, or you could go all out and outline everything, or you could do like a middle ground. Like an outline, it doesn't have to say every little point. Like you could have an outline that's really just like 3 sentences. Oh, this is how the story starts out, blah, blah, blah. This is the middle of it. This is the end. Then that could be your outline, just to kind of like guide you. One of the things that I do when I'm outlining is I'll start out really broad like that first. I'll do that broad outline that's just like a couple sentences. Then I'll do some writing. And then once I've done like several scenes of writing, that gives me more of an idea of where the story's going. So then I'll do a little more outlining to kind of flesh it out some more, and then go back to writing and then outlining. And that back and forth process is something that helps me flesh out the story more. But do what works for you. Find out what works for you. If you love outlining everything, then do that. If you absolutely hate outlining, then don't outline.
I have to add to that. So I am, you know, many of you I'm sure have heard plotter versus pantser. Yeah, Salima's a planner. I am a plantser. I am in between. I in my head, I will immediately see the scenes in my book. Like I know that in the beginning, Kate is in a warehouse and she's running for her life. So that's the one scene I have in my head right now. A few more will come to me before November, and I'll kind of outline that, and then I just fill in the rest. So I am a plantser.
For me in November, what helps me is to make sure, since I work during the day and I work at a computer all day. And so for me, it's make sure you make time and go write with someone either online or in person. Because if I just come home, I'm going to make dinner and I'm going to lay down on my couch and I'm going to watch some TV and I'm going to zone out. But I really can't. I've got a book that's due. So for me, it's going to be making sure I take a break between day job and then doing that. But I will often, if I can, if it's open in my schedule and it's not a far drive, I will very likely join Sonia if she's off somewhere in the hours in the evening, just because I have a day job. So, and I also have to make sure I come home and take care of the dog before I go somewhere. So it's whatever works best for your schedule, right? There's no right and wrong way to find time to write. It's whatever you can do. But it does mean some of your TV programs might have to go on hold while the month goes on. The bonus to that is you can binge a bunch of stuff when you get back in December and you can kick back and enjoy them then. But, I agree. I think that making sure the key to getting it done is making sure you try and do a little bit each day. And if you miss a day, make sure you sit for a little longer. I do a lot of my writing during November. I do it on the weekends because I have a day job. I, however, have an entire weekend that I'm going to lose in November because I am selling books at a convention in Tucson. So I'm going to miss a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. So
But you'll be selling books, so it's okay.
Yeah, so I got lucky. I got accepted into Tucson, which is a writers convention. I got accepted into it as a late person. Someone canceled and I was on the wait list, so I got in. So that is, so it's really what works best for your schedule. For me, it's a little haphazard, but I do like to meet with people and write in a coffee shop and spend money I don't have on coffee and tea and snacks and sit and write and have that. Even if we're not talking, at least it's someone there, and it helps, believe it or not, keeps me more focused.
Totally. Well, and Vicky is asking, should we write the whole story for 50,000 words and then fill in details later, or just write so many chapters up to 50,000 words and finish later? And I know I will write all the way up to November 31st, even if I've gotten more than 50,000, just because I know December 1st, my brain is going to explode if I write anymore. So December 1st, I stop writing. And it's my birthday, December 5th. So I run away for like a couple of days to just decompress. And I don't look at that novel again. I don't finish it. I don't do anything until January. So yeah, that's what I do. I don't know what you guys.
Oh yeah, no, I'll be writing. Like I'll work on it in December, but that also depends if I'm moving. So, because I'm in the process of possibly buying a house. So because I want to make sure everything is insane at the same time.
Right? Why not?
And a trip to England for research at the same time, try to move into a new house you buy it. Yeah.
Right.
So the point of Nano is just to get you writing. So you really don't need to, like, the goal isn't really, oh, I need to just write a story that's exactly 50,000 words. Pretty much it's just to get you writing and to build up that habit and to help you finish a novel. And so for me, I actually have never hit the 50,000 words because I'm like a really slow writer, but Nano is a great way to like kickstart that writing process. And so even after November's done, like I'll keep writing the same story, and it's a great way to just get words on the page. And then the other great thing about Nano is the community involvement. So it helps you to meet other writers, because I know that writing is kind of a solitary activity and it can seem kind of lonely at times. And so if you meet other writers, that can really inspire you to keep writing, and it builds that sense of community.
Okay, and I also just shared some, cool. 30,000 is perfect, right? Because 50,000 can be a little intimidating in a month. So whatever goal you guys make, I mean, that's perfect. You don't have to get 50,000. And I just shared 3 different books. So one thing I would say too is find books that help you keep writing. The last link I shared is actually my book. I wrote this after many years of doing NaNoWriMo, and each chapter is like a suggestion on something to write. So if you get stuck, that's a possible book to use to be like, open it up and say, okay, I'll do this today. I'll write this today. So look for books that inspire you to keep writing. And let me see, are we missing anything? I know we've hit the time, our time, it's 3:30. Let me see, what else were we supposed to talk about? Does anyone need to know how to sign up for NaNoWriMo? I can share the website. We can talk a little bit about that. Feel free to put in the comments or unmute if you care to sign up on the website. I can talk a little bit about that. Or any other questions? Does anybody have any other questions we can answer?
Just a super quick one. When you're thinking about a short story versus a novella versus a novel, any just tips you have? I know NaNoWriMo is like, the big book. Any tips you have when you're in one of those 3 modes and moving back and forth between them, how you kind of game plan your thoughts? If there's any thoughts you guys.
Short stories are not a lot of world building. If you are someone who likes to world build, short stories probably are not your bag, baby. But for me, the difference between them really is length. What you're looking for as far as it. A novella is about 50K. A short story is usually what, guys? It can be anywhere from 300 words to like 10,000 words.
I've seen flash fiction at 150. So
yeah,
you go anywhere from 150 to 5,000 words is usually a short story.
Up to
I just meant different
10,000
strategies you have. What is a shorter piece or medium or long? Just if you had any quick tips on how you game plan it when you're working on it.
So when I write a short story every quarter just to take a break from writing novels. The difference between a short story and a novel is a short story is very much about the character. It's very character driven, usually, most of the time. Whereas a novel is usually plot driven. So when you write a short story, you really have to know your character really well. So that's my tidbit about short versus long.
Yeah, and on the longer stories, there's a lot more room for subplots. Like the short stories, you can't really have many or any subplots. You just have to focus on that main plot.
Okay, let me sign out of here real quick. Or you know what, let me just go to the main page. Okay, so to sign up for NaNoWriMo, you would go to NaNoWriMo.org. Apparently I can't find the, apparently I am gonna get out of there. All right. And this is my homepage. All right. So when you get in here, what you need to do, so when I came in here earlier, I had my old last year's book listed right here. So in order to get rid of that, you have to go in. Uh-oh, my computer's overheating. Give me 1 second. A good use for those icy flavors you don't eat, FYI. Pull down the laptop. Okay. Hopefully my laptop doesn't explode. And so what you're gonna do, if I can find it, my NaNoWriMo. you're gonna go to My NaNoWriMo and you're gonna go to projects and you're gonna create a new project and you're gonna link it to NaNoWriMo 2022. And then suddenly, so that is the project connected to this year's upcoming NaNoWriMo. And you guys can see my username is Sonia Y Doing. So you're welcome to friend me. I will be using, even though I'm not a liaison, I'm still going to use their website, and I'll be online here updating my numbers. Let's see. Any questions about signing in? And if you go, for those of you who are not in Albuquerque, basically you would go into here and select your home region. So I am in Albuquerque. Your liaison should post some notes here in the regional information. For those of you in Albuquerque, there's no new information because none of us came back as liaisons this year. I was really hoping somebody new would pop in, but it didn't happen. All right, any questions about the NaNoWriMo website? All right, I'm going to stop sharing.